Hello, peoples, and welcome to Esoteric Cinema, the program where we take films and discuss the hell out of them. My name is Jason Peters. With me, as always, is Timothy Chalamet's personal stylist, Mr. Ryan Seabold.
What's up, Jason? How's it going, buddy?
Going well. And let me say, sir, exquisite taste for you and that man.
Hey, thanks, man. I did a Marty Supreme job at that. Yeah.
Hey! Ryan, do you have a description of today's film for our audience, sir?
I do, my friend. Today marks a second in our series covering classic serial killer films. With the granddaddy of them all, I've got the poster. I've got the Criterion 4K. It's Silence of the Lambs. We follow Clarice Starling, an FBI agent who's been brought into a hot case to try and get an imprisoned legendary serial killer Hannibal Lecter to assist in the capture of another active killer named Buffalo Bill in a cat and mouse race against time before he kills his next victim. Clarice must attempt a battle of wits and judgment of character against the brilliant mind of Hannibal as he brings her face to face with her own demons to prepare for a takedown of the nefarious Buffalo Bill. The film was directed by the unlikely choice of Jonathan Demme, who perhaps was mostly known for the Talking Heads live show Stop Making Sense, but was coming off of Married to the Mob with Michelle Pfeiffer. This film stars, of course, Jodie Foster, Anthony Hopkins, Ted Levine, and Scott Glenn, was based on the second in a series of novels by Tom Harris, written by Ted Talley, shot by Tak Fujimoto, and scored by the great Howard Shore. This was the little film that could, working on a budget of under $20 million and bringing in a massive haul of over $270 million worldwide, along with clearing the big five at the Oscars, including Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Actress, and Screenplay, and many, many other awards across the globe. Not everyone agreed on the film's merits, though, including the late Gene Siskel, who sparred with his TV partner Roger Ebert over how much he disliked it. So now it's on to us to debate this, and I've got to ask you as always, Jason, has this film held up to its hype, or has it aged badly?
Oh, man. You said the first half, and I was like, he's not going to do the pun. And then second half showed up. I was proven wrong.
I rope-a-doped you. I set you up and then got you in there. Yep. The old bait and switch. Aged badly. You know, because lambs.
Oh, Ryan, my good dear friend. I am going to tell you what I think about this film right here in my opening statement. Silence of the Lambs is a highly effective and exceptionally crafted thriller. The film features evocative atmosphere and tightly controlled pacing from director Jonathan Demme, moody lighting, and a strong sense of character subjectivity from DP Tak Fujimoto, a similar sense of emblematic character POV from noted composer Howard Shore, who is, by the way, Ryan, seemingly a regular on this show. Howard Shore comes up so much in our films.
Yeah.
And also two of the best performances to ever come out of a major studio psychological thriller. It's striking how, upon my most recent viewing of this film, Silence of the Lambs revealed itself to be created with almost an embrace of traditional Western cinematic values. The screenplay from Ted Talley is a textbook example of three-act structure and presents also the three main emotional archetypes, let's call them, of the good, the bad, and maybe the morally ambiguous, right? Demme's camera utilizes different shots as the scenes dictate, most striking of which are the extreme close-ups that occur primarily between Clarice and Hannibal Lecter, but also with characters such as Ardelia, Catherine Martin, and actually the police force as a whole. Silence of the Lambs is a heralded movie in American cinema for a reason, largely because it displays why the traditional Western approach to filmmaking is so effective. And by following the fundamentals in virtually every aspect of its production, it creates a consistent and homogeneous viewing experience that will continue to stand the test of time. Ryan, what did you think, my friend?
Well, Jason, I'm afraid I'm going to have to start this whole thing out with yet another cinematic confession. As this was my first viewing of this film. I'm sure anyone who lived through this era will remember being blasted with countless Hannibal and Buffalo Bill parodies and impressions, and I felt like some of the most powerful moments of the film had been ruined for me. So I'd always skipped it. Shame on me though, because though this had all the makings of a decent B-movie, it was also absolutely elevated by every single person involved, and I love this film for reasons I did not expect. Starting with how it was mostly centered around the female experience, battling 20th century patriarchy, with us as the audience consistently thrust into Agent Starling's point of view. You can't help but share Starling's confidence and insecurities, terrors and resolves, as we get shot after shot of men looking right down the lens into her point of view. And yes, of course Hopkins redefined his career with his iconic role here, but this was Clarice's film, and Foster absolutely rose to the occasion. I'm going to ruffle a few feathers here, but my least favorite thing about this film was Ted Levine's Buffalo Bill. This was probably mostly due to me having been exposed to most of his scenes here, so there was nothing that really shocked me. The cinematography by Tak Fujimoto, who has shot everything from Ferris Bueller's Day Off to The Sixth Sense, opted for more of a personal, intimate take here, appropriately drawing you into the tense moments, rather than trying to impress you with bombastic shots. The story and screenplay was not at all what I expected, having very little serial killing moments, and leaned more heavily into being a brilliant, intense police procedural, and a masterclass of what they don't show you. And perhaps the star of the show to me, yet again, as this is, I believe, his 4th or 5th appearance here, is our favorite little overachiever, Howard Shore. I was shocked he wasn't at least nominated for awards here, but he would have been up against Alan Menken's Beauty and the Beast, and good luck with all that. But I think his experiences with David Cronenberg on films like The Fly gave him the perfect chops to know how to treat this material seriously and not take the easy way out. I could go on, but this film took me by surprise for reasons I didn't see coming. It mostly deserved all of its hype, and I really loved this movie, Jason.
Nice. Ryan, so I would like to begin today's discussion by speaking about director Jonathan Demme's work here.
Sure.
And I can't say that Demme's a filmmaker I'm overly familiar with. I've seen this film now. I've seen Philadelphia, and I've seen Stop Making Sense. And it's kind of hard to see a through line between those films. You know, his filmography is kind of all over the map.
Right.
But that doesn't take away from like the really solid work that he's doing here. So I'll actually tee you up and ask you what stood out the most to you about his work on Silence of the Lambs.
Just, again, I can't state enough how this is, and we've talked about this before the show a little bit as well, but this is a B movie that's so elevated. I can't get over how this movie should not have worked as well as it did. Mm-hmm. So, you know, just the decisions and choices he made along the way of how to make this the most tense police procedural, because most of this film, and we both kind of touched on it in our opening statements, but it's by the numbers. There's nothing bombastic about this. Mm-hmm. It's really intimate. It's very much relying on the performances, the score, all the department heads. He just put together an all-star roster. You know, it's kind of like if you had like a baseball coach that just was okay, but put together the craziest roster of people and just relied on the skills and talents of the people he put together. Just do the thing I hired you to do. Do it the best you can, and I trust you. Also, I think it's my opinion that because the budget was only $20 million, you know, there's a thing that you see directors say sometimes in various interviews where it's, you know, that's kind of a common through line that's like, tell me the amount of a budget that's going to keep you away from me as the studio. Like, what is the number that
what gives
allows
me the most creative control?
Correct. Thank you. Yep.
Yeah.
And I think that he was in that zone here. I think that at $20 million, give or take, I think it was actually closer to 19. He was so under the radar that he was allowed to hire who he wanted, do what he wanted, and was given complete creative control, and without any studio interference, without a lot of re-edits and so forth. And I think that we got the best version of this thing. And it's really a testament to letting creatives be.
I was very impressed with how much he seemed to be really going after finding the crux of the theme and the story. And, you know, Jonathan Demme's a known entity, right? Maybe I hadn't seen a ton of his films, but I know him by name. And so anytime a director has that sort of reputation, they tend to also have a very sort of distinctive style, right? We saw that during our last episode with Dress to Kill, right? Brian De Palma has a very distinctive visual style. And even just having only seen a handful of De Palma films, you could tell that felt like a De Palma film. And it seems like maybe Demme's success is because he can sort of do this chameleon act of jumping into a music documentary and then a silly comedy and then, you know, jumping over here into psychological thriller. Yeah, to your point, just, you know, really trying to extract the theme of the film, which, you know, I think that it was most memorably summed up by his interaction with Jodie Foster when she was lobbying for the film. So if you're watching, you may not know that Jodie Foster was actually not the first choice for this film. It was actually Michelle Pfeiffer, because Michelle Pfeiffer had a very strong relationship with director Jonathan Demme. He had already chosen her, but Jodie Foster read the book, loved the film. She had been doing sort of almost these like victim sort of roles and wanted to play a strong character. So she actually flew out to Demme to convince him why she should be her second choice, or rather his second choice. And during that, she said, he said that she sort of opened up the theme of the film, because she said that what appeals to me about this film is that Clarice is a woman who her job is to go and save other women. That's what consumes her. That's what drives her. And so in saying that to Demme, he was like, wow, thank you for, establishing the directorial theme of my film, because you're absolutely right. That's what this film is. And then it would actually work out that Michelle Pfeiffer would go on to drop out. And so Jodie Foster was brought in. And to your point, relying on the people around you, who come up with these strong ideas. And, so much of direction, people forget that, as much as it is having a distinctive vision and a unique style and all of that, there's a workmanship element to it where, you're managing a set, you're a supervisor, for a company, and this company may only exist for 30 to 60 days while you're in production. But during that time, it's your job as a director to get the best out of your people, not to just be the most distinctive visual stylist that you can be,
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, just based on the research done for this film, it kind of seems like that was Demme's special sauce as to how he was able to make such a career for himself.
I also think he had a firm understanding of the material, more so than another director would. Every now and then you land on that just perfect movie for the perfect person at the perfect time. They get it. And I do think he got it in this one. Like, he understood it, but he also understood enough about his department heads to really lean on them and trust what they were doing. Also with the casting.
Sure.
I mean, we're going to talk about this here shortly, but Hannibal Lecter was supposed to be Sean Connery. And
yeah,
that would have been
wild.
a completely different
imagine?
Movie. Yeah. He was the bigger star.
Hello, Clarice.
It's easy to forget that Anthony Hopkins at this time wasn't a big star. This made him a big star. He had been working for a long time. He was in The Elephant Man that we've covered on this show and did a great job with that. But he was mostly a stage guy at this juncture and was doing a lot of stuff in London. So, yeah, I mean, he just had a knack for picking the right people and put the right people in charge. And what we got, I think, is a stew, a collaboration of so many people that understood the material and brought their best.
So often I think that, we look at a director and, if it's not a Paul Thomas Anderson or a Brian De Palma, where there's just like a very distinctive style where you could just watch 2 minutes of a movie and be like, oh, that's their movie, right? Tarantino, any of these guys, they have that. It appears that Demme does not necessarily have that distinction, but at the same time, again, going back to what is your first job as a director? It's to direct other people, right? Like, it's not just directing the through line of the film and the construction of the film, but it's directing the people around you to do their job the best. And I often sort of have, I have sort of like a personal beef with the academies with regards to Dune 2 for this very reason, because Dune 2 got every nomination for every single department head you could do, photography, sound, and it deserved all of those. The one thing it didn't get was a director nomination for Denis Villeneuve. And I believe that it's this sort of approach to what a director is and is not that left him left out of that race. And again, if everybody on your set is doing their best work, that is a direct reflection of you, the director, and the environment that you have set up, the trust that you put in your people, the fostering of bringing out the best of those around you. And I think that that's an overlooked quality when it comes to film criticism and the way that, we as an audience digest and assess different directors. I think there's a lot of value in, again, getting the best of your people just as much as having a super distinctive visual style.
And I think that's fair. I think more what I'm talking about is Demme as an auteur versus, Demme as a showrunner. And I think that he put a lot of faith and trust in his department heads and his actors and talent to, bring what they had and trust their performances and their takes on the material, because he knew that everybody involved had such an understanding of what needed to be done, that it wasn't necessarily entirely his vision. I don't know that that was his mindset when Hopkins brought Lecter to the table, or when Clarice showed that level of vulnerability and strength in the same moments. I think those were the actor's choices in a lot of ways. And so, when I say Demme didn't kill it, I don't mean he didn't do a fantastic job of directing this film. Because that's, you're absolutely right. That is a huge part of directing, is trusting the people you put into these positions to do their jobs. And see what they've got. But, sometimes you get these directors that are like, no, you're going to do it my way, like a
Yeah.
Fincher or something like that, like a David Fincher, which, we're going to get to one of his films here shortly in the series. But yeah, it's those are more auteurs where this is their shit. This is their vision. This is, and very little is left to department heads because they're so controlling. And I don't think that was his, it's my understanding that was not his MO on this.
Yeah, and that's fair. But it's also fair to look at some of the stuff that he did do and call attention to that. I think that when you think about this film, one of the more memorable aspects, at least for me, are those extreme close-ups that we get, right? Where just people are just looking straight down the barrel into the camera, And so even just the creative decisions that Demme makes here, again, to when in the beginning, when Clarice is going through Quantico, you brought that up, and all of these guys are looking at her, and physically Jodie Foster is a small woman, and and Demme wisely cast very large men to sort of be around her, to sort of emphasize her being this woman in a man's world. And then even as she's walking through, instead of just showing the people turning their heads as she walks past, like Demme has them just look straight into the barrel and do these close-ups and extreme close-ups. And, even the way that the interactions with Hannibal and Clarice, it's the same way where, we get a wide shot that shows us, it's this, maximum security wing of the prison and all of that. But then as their conversations start to progress, those shots get tighter and tighter. A wide shot goes to a medium, goes to a close up. And then before you know it, it's like, it's just these extreme close-ups on both of their face, because in these moments, in these interactions, there is nothing else in their world besides the two of them interacting with one another. The rest of the world ceases to exist during these exchanges between Hannibal and Clarice. And so, again, the creative decision to shoot and block and present this information this way, and then, when the conversation ends, we go back to that wide shot. The world comes back into play. We zap out of that trance along with those characters. And again, that's all due to the creative decisions that either Jonathan Demme made himself or empowered his team to make, and then listened to these very strong suggestions and incorporated them into the film.
One thing I'll add before we move on is that struck me is that how Demme is really good at mastering empathy and compassion and understanding. I mean, you look at a film like Philadelphia, and
100%,
the HIV and AIDS epidemic at that time. I mean, even still to this day, but at that time especially, AIDS was scary as shit. I mean, that's a death sentence, and it's a slow one. And the fact that he was able to drive such heart-wrenching, gut-wrenching empathy. And of course, you could lean on the performances of Denzel and Hanks and so forth. But I would argue that in this particular case, Demme, yet again, prior to Philadelphia, but yet again, exhibits masterful empathy. Hannibal Lecter exhibits control in every scene he's in by asking questions and listening. All the other men in the film are more aggressive and can't wait to talk. But Hannibal Lecter draws you in, being inquisitive, calm, and in a lot of ways empathetic. There are many times in this film where you're like, oh, he's not such a bad guy. He wants to know about this woman. Like he's asking about her life. What's your background? What makes you tick? Tell me about your scary moments and your good times. So, hey, look. I think this is a lesson for the men out there. Be more like Hannibal Lecter. I think this is a great...
That's the takeaway from this film.
That's my takeaway.
Be more Hannibal Lecter.
Yeah, right. Bring a little Hannibal into your life. Ask a woman how she's doing. Tell me about the lambs. Oh, really? You grew up on a farm. Let's talk about that.
Well, Ryan, we can use that to pivot to the next aspect of this discussion that really makes the film work, which is the acting, by our primary and supporting characters. I said at the top of the episode, this is one of the finest acted psychological thrillers released by a major American studio. And I believe that's true. From the big roles to the small, all the performances range from solid to spectacular. I actually disagree with you. I thought Ted Levine did a really good job. You maybe have some, good points with regards to his character, but I do think that he was a great choice for that. I think he's very memorable. The fact that anytime I've ever seen Ted Levine show up in bit parts, because he only does bit parts in other films, I'm always, oh, look, it's Buffalo Bill.
I didn't care for Ted Levine's performance only because he was supposed to be a very threatening, scary character, and what we heard from him seemed kind of hammy. He's also not in the movie very often. You know, he shares very little amount of screen time. And in those moments, we don't really see him doing a lot of serial killing stuff. We see him, imprison the woman in the van when he gets help. You know, I guess that was, taken from other serial killer moments through the ages. You know, they kind of begged, stole, and borrowed from various serial killer stories and biographies to kind of incorporate that into the Buffalo Bill character. But there was never a moment where I felt like this guy was the end all be all of evil. I thought that, he just seemed a little silly with his voice inflections and his delivery. And also, and I stand by this, so much of that was ruined for me throughout, parody and in those times. So, if the guy's got 10 minutes of screen time or 15 minutes of screen time, if that, if I've seen 12 of them, then it's not very shocking when he does show up and say, put the lotion in the basket. Where at that time, if I had seen it brand new in theaters and he's telling this woman to lubricate her skin because I want that to wear as a meat suit, that's very, very haunting. But, again, a lot of that was stolen from me, unfortunately.
Absolutely. Now, I do think also, when we look at Anthony Hopkins, right, one of the great decisions that he makes is to play him with not just intellect, but this very odd and undeniable charisma that he presents throughout,
Sure.
And again, it's like you were just saying, right? Like, be more like Hannibal. And it's like, oh, that's funny. But like, there is an aspect of him that is, I don't know if relatable is the right word, but attractive, again, like it comes with a charisma, and it's definitely not a traditional charisma. Like, he's not like a Mr. Salesman. Hey, I'm going to sell you, blah, blah, blah. But there's something where you're like, I don't know why, but I kind of like this dude, even though I shouldn't, and he eats people. And that's why I sort of say, he's that third sort of like ambiguous character, because, Jodie Foster is pure good, Buffalo Bill's pure evil, and then he's somewhere in the middle. He's still evil, but there's an aspect to him that we like and respect. And I think that also speaks to our response collectively to intelligence. And I think that's part of Anthony Hopkins' Riz, as you so well put it, is, again, that he's always at the top of his intelligence, and you get that every moment that he speaks, every non-blink of the eyes that he gives, it shines through.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, Hannibal Lecter is such a supervillain in his confidence, right? Like, that's the key thing that we always hone in on a supervillain, whether it's Kingpin or Lex Luthor or whatever. It's, their confidence of world domination in that moment, standing toe to toe against Superman or whatever it is. I mean, this guy is locked up beyond all comprehension. He's in a prison within another prison, and yet he speaks with such authority. I mean, I was thinking when I was watching this, this is the dangers of alpha male syndrome, right? We're talking about don't be a beta, be an alpha. It's like, I don't know, but I think that the casting of Anthony Hopkins was so smart, because at this point in his career, he was a theater actor, like I was saying earlier. And I think that when you have a character like Hannibal Lecter that is in a confined space, I mean, he doesn't have a lot of room to emote or perform or exude. He doesn't have any action sequences, barring the escape scene at the end of the film, but that's already in the third act. And by then you've already made up your mind whether you like this guy or not, right? So you've got to get a guy that's really keen in monologuing and can look down the barrel of a camera and perform like you would on a theater stage, where, in a Broadway play or something like that, you don't have this great, different camera angles, and I'm going to cut to this and cut to that. You've got a stage and whatever's there around you to interact with, and you've got to emote. And I think that he was able to deliver this performance because of his experiences in that. And he was able to bring that level of confidence of like, oh, you're just going to put me here and I got to just rock out for the next 10 minutes? Watch me go. Mic drop. Boom. And that's what we got.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then, of course, Jodie Foster's great performance. There is something, to be said about certain castings, right? Because, again, physically, she is a rather small and diminutive presence when she's on screen, or certainly in person, especially when she's cast all against these huge, really large men. But that being said, it makes her strength stand out that much more. It makes it more impressive, again, wisely making this about the pursuit of this woman, and, her playing the role of the savior. We get a little bit of backstory with regards to the lambs bleeding and, that whole backstory. It's just a few minutes here and there. We don't spend a ton of time in that space. And I think that's a direct reflection of both the directorial and screenplay decisions, as well as those acting decisions. Is, again, we're not going to spend a ton of time on Clarice feeling sorry for herself or, pitying her situation or not able to act because of past traumas. Like, no, like she is a woman of action and she has a goal. That goal is to save this young woman, and she's going to dedicate herself to that.
Yeah, this was a weird anomaly for me because usually you go into a film like this, with your hero only being as strong as the antagonist, right? Spider-Man, Superman, Batman are only really as good as their rogues gallery. And, you oftentimes will know the villains as good or better by the end of a good comic book run or a good film as you do your hero. And in this particular case, again, not being quite as impressed with the Buffalo Bill character. And oh, by the way, this has nothing to do with Levine's performance necessarily. I just didn't like the character themselves. So that's worth delineating. But also, Hannibal Lecter has so little screen time. He's not really the villain. In fact, he's kind of helping her as an anti-hero of sorts along the way and getting to bring out the best in her, challenging her. This was Clarice's story. And I was shocked to find out when I watched this, expecting this to be a Buffalo Bill Hannibal Lecter movie, that it was a Clarice movie. And I actually really love Jodie Foster's performance. There aren't many, and shame on me, there aren't many Jodie Foster standout performances that I could really wrap my head around, like that I can come up with off the dome and be like,
a lot of her films, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, you've got Contact, you've got Nell, there's a few Panic Room, there's a few standouts along the way that kind of key in, but nothing as strong as this. This is like, I know she was coming off of the Oscar win for The Accused, but, I have not seen that movie either. Shame on me, apparently. I should go back and watch that because apparently she was on fire right now in this era of her career. But yeah, her exuding both vulnerability and strength simultaneously in a lot of these scenes, and the power dynamic. Like you said, in extreme close-ups, her welling up with tears, but then taking the control back. Fantastic stuff. The fact that you feel for her, but also are rooting for her, and you believe in the end that she has the strength and determination to crack this case and to beat off, and to win over Buffalo Bill. I shouldn't say beat off Buffalo Bill. To win over Buffalo Bill. Back. Yeah. Oh, man. I may leave that in. Yeah. Would you fuck me? Yeah. Maybe, I don't know. I don't think she swings that way. Carry on. Yeah. I was so delighted. And and I can't stress this enough, in this particular day and age, in 91, 92, when this movie was huge and winning all the awards, to make a film that even touches on the patriarchy and a woman's struggle wasn't something you saw every day. It wasn't something that was discussed. And I think the subtle nature of that and how Demme approached that and how Jodie Foster took on this character, I think was huge. I don't know if this works with Michelle Pfeiffer. I heard that she was the first choice, and I know he had a relationship with her and this and that. I can't see her in this role. Jodie Foster is this character. She is Clarice Starling.
100%. Yeah. And so let's go ahead and also talk about another great part of the film's DNA that you brought up, both of us did, which is the score from composer Howard Shore.
Hell yeah,
which,
brother.
Again, he's become something of a regular on this show. We love having you on, Howard. We have you every time. But he does some really interesting work, and in sort of researching it, to your point that you mentioned earlier, right? There's very little bombastic and attention calling about this film. And the score is definitely part of that, It sort of maybe exists in almost sort of like an atonal sort of space. It's kind of just tone and it's sort of mood. It's unsettling without being disturbing the way a horror score necessarily is. Mm-hmm. And in doing the research, it seems that a large part of that is that he wisely decided to compose the score from the POV of Clarice. And once again, I think this just helps reinforce what you're mentioning about this is the entire, whatever's going on with Bill and Lecter and all that sort of stuff, it's Clarice's film. And so for the score to reflect her response to the images that we're seeing on film, as opposed to necessarily reacting to the images themselves, was a really, really strong choice from the great Howard Shore.
Absolutely. And Howard Shore connects this to another film that I would say goes right next to this. And it's a film we've covered on the show that I thought about a lot when I was doing my research and notes for this episode, and that is The Fly. The Fly is a film by Cronenberg that we discussed ad nauseum should not have been as good as it was. But everybody involved brought their A game with Goldblum and Davis and all this stuff. And Howard Shore, in a very similar fashion, to not play into tropes and to treat this like A quality material for a movie that should have been a B movie. And this is no different. This very easily could have been a late night Cinemax, Silk Stockings, or, some kind of X-Files episode or something like that. And it got elevated to an Oscar-winning nightmare of a film. And Howard Shore, I think, I think everybody involved put this in Clarice's point of view. Going back to what we were saying before, I really would give Demme credit for making sure all the department heads fell in line with that, cinematography, so forth, but also just treated this, his score is almost operatic. Like, it's not dun, dun, dun. He doesn't lay up easy shots for the cheap scares, going around a corner, it's a very serious film. And I think, again, he did the same thing with The Fly. And then he goes on later to do the same thing with Lord of the Rings and gives us that insanely iconic score for a film that also could have been cheesy fantasy B material by Peter Jackson, who wasn't really experienced enough on paper to do a trilogy like that, or sextology, whatever you want to call it. There's six of them. Maybe sextology isn't the word, but carry on. I don't know, man. I think that Howard Shore is the guy you want when you got yourself a B movie, but you want to make it an A movie. That's who you call.
Absolutely, yeah. And it also kind of calls to attention that there are a number of really visually driven, dialogue-free scenes that we get in the film. And again, I think it's a testament to his work here that you don't really think that as you're watching it, it's not like, again, to use the most recent film in our series, Dressed to Kill, right? There was that long museum sequence. We kind of had a different interpretation of that, but it was like 10 minutes. And so, of course, that score is going to have a lot of opportunity to really show off. But here, again, it's not showy. It's there, and it's very much there, but you don't notice it until you really go back and kind of analyze it outside of the film. Like, wow, there's a lot of dialogue free sequences. Even the big escape from the prison and everything that goes along with that, outside of like just sort of like generic yells from the police of like, he's over there, da da da. Like, there's not really a ton of dialogue that's actually driving the film forward. So again, that just puts that much more pressure or, responsibility on Shore's shoulders, and as usual, comes through and crushes it.
So often in this film is what impressed me the most is the use of restraint. You kind of touched on it there with your last point, which makes me want to talk about that a little more. It's not what's shown, but what isn't shown. We get very little graphic, gory serial killing stuff. Everything is alluded to. It happened in the past.
That's very true.
And then also the score. It's not what necessarily is playing, but what isn't. He knew, Howard Shore, meaning Howard Shore knew when to cut it down. And in the moments where Clarice is talking to Hannibal Lecter in prison and they're getting that back and forth, it goes dead silent for a while. It's just the two of them. All the music drops out. It could have been very easy to get some like soft, spooky strings in there, something kind of haunting to give an undertone. In the silence of it all, and just hearing Hannibal speak and giving Anthony Hopkins that moment to exude that confidence, and Clarice to show that vulnerability and understanding and even empathy at times, that back and forth between those two characters, I thought was a masterclass in restraint. To be like, no, you don't need me on this one. This is all them. Like, look at what you got on film, dude. Let that go. And then I'll catch back up when she leaves. Like, once we get going again, then I'll cut back in. Because again, this is Clarice's score, and I'll give her some motion music. But other than that, let her cook, as they say.
Yes, sir. And I do also just want to touch on the cinematography from director of photography, Tak Fujimoto, because it's an interesting aspect of this film. One of the things that sort of struck me on this viewing is that the exteriors are typically sort of very foggy, very foreboding. There's not a lot of visibility. We don't get, even though we're in the mountains, we get no vistas or wide shots or anything like that. And so there's this very sort of like, gray, sort of northeastern kind of feel to the weather. But then the interiors sometimes can be surprisingly colorful and almost well lit. And it's almost like a very sort of high contrast, almost like noir inspired photography that goes on at times. And not just with, again, a stark black and white, but a stark like color versus non-color,
Sure.
And I also think it's very interesting that, again, for such a sort of like, muted film with regards to the exteriors, Fujimoto's not afraid to throw a really dramatic gel or two in there for some of those dramatic moments, right? Like I'm thinking of like the first time that Clarice goes down to visit Hannibal Lecter and, we walk down the staircase and then, when they get to the bottom right before she's about to, the bars are going to open, she goes in, there's just this giant red dramatic gel that's just flashing on. Like all you see in this image is red because like at this point she's just gone down into the bowels of hell, right? That's like the sort of visual theme. And so for a film that's mostly, not relying on, gels, sort of stark black and white colors, like if there's color there, it's really through the set design, but the DP's allowing it to show through. But again, I like that there's these little artistic moments where they say, hey, you know what, for this one scene, even though on paper, maybe it doesn't fit with the theme, the visual theme that we're doing, like, let's throw that in there. Let's call attention to this moment. And I like that they were willing to do that.
Sure. The scene where the guard is strung up on the cage in the third act. Absolutely
Definitely.
Beautiful with the streaks of light, almost a bit of a haze in the air. It looks like an old museum. You're kind of squinting to see, wait, what is that? Oh, geez, like it gets you. I would say that he did a great job building tension, especially in the claustrophobia, how he closed and opened the frame when he chose to show you more or less. You never really know what's going on in some of the more claustrophobic moments, which added to a lot of the tension. There's nothing bombastic here. This isn't it doesn't have a lot of bombastic oneers like Children of Men or something like that, where it's like, oh crap, we're going on this big, long Steadicam ride. It's very by the numbers, but it's the best by the numbers you can get. It was what served the film best, not what's going to serve my demo reel best.
And I do think they again, took advantage of, certain moments to make some interesting lighting decisions. We talked about the gels a minute ago, but
Sure.
I also really like when they're during that scene that you're talking about, during the prison breakout, right before all the stuff goes down, when Hannibal and Clarice are having their last exchange, Fujimoto actually makes a decision, like for this last extreme close-up, he's going to take away the light from their actual face, like that front light, and we're just going to have the background. And the reason that he did this is he mentions how, in keeping with that, like, there's nothing else but the two of them and Clarice and Hannibal as they're having this exchange. It's almost like as if in this final exchange, they've drifted into a void, into some dark sort of undefined void. And so by removing the light from their faces, it's reflective of that theme within that moment. So again, there's just, they could have very well just have, gone out with one last extreme close-up and it was lit just as we've always seen. We wouldn't have thought anything of it, but it's these tiny little touches, that constantly spring up throughout the film that really elevate it,
One thing I noticed around that time in the film as well is when Hannibal is dressed in just a plain white t-shirt. Up to this point, he's been in almost like a denim jumpsuit in prison, but now he's allowed to just wear his white t-shirt. And when he leans in and we get an extreme close-up of Hannibal Lecter's face, he hunches over and the white t-shirt almost takes up most of the backdrop. And it's given a bit of a Robert Richardson style glow about it. And it almost looks innocent or angelic. Like he's surrounded, half of the frame is just this white, his shoulders and chest in this white t-shirt. And that's your backdrop with this evil, face, the devil's eyes, and it's kind of luring in like, wolf in sheep's clothing, so to speak. And I really enjoyed that framing.
Now, before we wrap up, Ryan, I just want to give a quick shout out to screenwriter Ted Talley. It's not a flashy screenplay by any means, but I love how well it works in concert with the rest of the directorial and department decisions, right? Of just making this Clarice's story, of centering on the pursuit of saving this woman, not going into crazy backstories, not forcing some sort of romantic relationship between the Scott Glenn character, her supervisor, and Clarice, right? Like there's little tiny little moments where you go, oh, there was a little look there. There was a little exchange. We have a charisma, but we don't need to spend actual time developing this into a little romance. I also thought it was interesting. I think we almost get the same thing with her and the Ardelia character. I think there was a level of attraction between the two of them that sort of spoke to a little more than what was on the surface. But again, the film and the screenplay wisely decides not to turn that into a subplot, you know? It's just brought up as a sort of character shade, and it makes them feel more real. But again, it doesn't detract from the through line of the story, the through line of the character. It remains consistent with everyone's motivations, and I really appreciated that.
Like the male gaze is almost entirely removed from this film. And when it is used, it's used in a villainous role. And I think that was a tremendous decision by the screenwriter, because I think it would have been very easy, especially in the era of the early 90s, where you've got all the sultry, sexy, thrillers at that time. Your Jades, your Basic Instincts, your Slivers.
Even Dressed to Kill, right? There wasn't shy about nudity.
Right, absolutely. I thought that was a really good decision to, if you are going to incorporate the male gaze, it's in a villainous way. This is a bad person. And I thought that was interesting to do in 1991 when the male gaze was heralded over most things in screenplays. That was a real easy, cheap thing to do.
Yeah. The male gaze in this film is the most intense gaze you've ever gotten in your life. It's certainly not a sexy thing.
Sure.
Just those big, giant Hannibal Lecter eyes staring at you. You're like, I'm uncomfortable as go. But uncomfortable for very different reasons than the usual male gaze.
Absolutely. I will say before we wrap up, it was interesting to me that this is the second and will be the third, stay tuned, everybody, transgender person or gender dysphoric person to be our villain in the film. Again, being in the early 90s, we're coming out of the 80s with Dressed to Kill. That was a trans or gender dysphoric person. And now we're, back in the same way. And there's a third one coming, stay tuned, where, that's just an interesting trope to me, to think that these people are, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. They're confused. They don't understand. So it'd be really easy for them to be one way, in public and to trick people. And then, in private, they're a different way. And I think that was just a general misunderstanding of what that is. And, sometimes it's easy to chalk up, we have so far left to go, and we do have so far left to go in compassion and understanding about certain walks of life or the way people are. But we've come a long way. And I think that, every now and then you got to look back, and film can act as a good milestone in these different eras. You could look back through the ages. And that's one thing I love about this show, is to go back and see how different groups of people or different walks of life or different eras were portrayed at that time, in the heat of the night, with civil rights and so forth. You get into some of these moments. And I think it's really interesting to educate yourself and then to see where we are now. And it's like, well, we still got a long way to go, but could be worse. We've come a long way.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think that on that note, because obviously there's some attention on there with regard to Ted Levine's recent comments with that. I thought this film was interesting because I think that, two things can be true. I think that a film can use, transgender serial killer in a certain way, but the film also kind of, if you look, the film kind of goes out of its way to say, we're not making a statement about transgender people. We're not saying that all transgender people are serial killers. And there's a couple different moments that inform that. The first is when they're first identifying the serial killer potentially as a transgender person. Clarice says, well, there's a good chance that they're not because the studies show that transgender people are generally passive and, don't engage in violence against other people. So that wouldn't be consistent with that. So there's that. And also part of the reason that Buffalo Bill is in the psychological state that he's in is because he has not been approved to get gender reassignment surgery because they have interviewed him and come to the conclusion that he is not a genuinely transgender person in his heart, in his mind, in his being, but rather he is someone who is trying to escape who he is and is almost just like skipping through different potential things. They mentioned that when he was younger, he had a homosexual relationship. That didn't really work. So it's almost like he's sort of like, I don't feel comfortable in my own skin, but I don't know what my true skin is. Let me try a bunch of these different things on. And this is his sort of next step in that journey.
Right.
While also, so, while the film takes that, it is also completely fair to say that the time, this, society, the early 90s, late 80s, was very much insensitive to the transgender experience, to the point that it was very common to make that a trope, oh, they're so insane, they want to be a woman or a man or whatever, and so for this film to be released at that time, when there is, a very admitted sort of social insensitivity towards the transgender experience, I think it was easy for it to be lumped in there. But I think if you really look closely, and especially after listening to Demme talk about the film and his thoughts on people, like he seems like a very genuine person that would not, seek to imbue his film with that sort of messaging. So
Right. And I also feel that about Brian De Palma, as we're doing some research. I don't think he was trying to put that on anyone either. I think that, it was a curiosity at that time. We were educating ourselves when we were going through it. But I just thought it was interesting.
Absolutely, Ryan. So with that, we will go on to one of our final features here on this episode, 3 scenes.
Three scenes!
Ryan and I reference the 3 scenes that we feel best summarize our response to this film. Ryan, you know how we do. Go ahead and go first, sir.
Well, I'm going to start with the introduction to Clarice Starling at Quantico. And the first few minutes of the film, we get to know a lot about her without much dialogue. I thought that was a tremendous introduction to what, to me, was the strongest character in the film. Hannibal Lecter kills it, but he has such a small amount of screen time, it's hard not to make this Clarice's movie, and she did a great introduction there. The last 2 are going to be very similar, and that's the first and last scenes of Starling engaging with Hannibal Lecter. I love the vulnerability, the power struggle, the intensity, the tight shots, claustrophobia, all of the things, the monologuing by Lecter, fantastic stuff. That was absolute cinema, so got to put those in there as well. How about you, Jason?
Absolutely. So yeah, first, got to be Clarice and Hannibal's first exchange. Hannibal Lecter's just such a fascinating character, and seeing him in the flesh for the first time, with all the intelligence and fascinating charisma that Hopkins brings to the role, it's an electric experience. My second scene, the opening credits. I think Demme and Shore do a great job of utilizing their respective talents to create an atmosphere of creeping dread, while Foster demonstrates the grit and determination that's going to define her character over the course of the film. And then the third is that prison breakout. It's essentially sort of an 8-minute mini movie within a movie, and it's exciting and it's suspenseful and it's got great acting and effective editing. And I will say arguably the best use of an elevator floor counter, the little top floors going up and down. Best use of that in any film to date. I loved what they did there. So Ryan, let's go ahead and
with an elevator counter too. We had the elevator
there you go.
Stuff going. I love it.
Following tropes here on this show. So star rating, I'm giving this one a near perfect 4 3/4 out of 5 stars. Loved every minute of it. No complaints. Perfectly made film. What do you think, sir?
4.5 stars. We're right in line. I think this was near perfect. Not quite there. The Ted Levine stuff, sure. Also interesting to note, we didn't really get a lot of character development. Everybody kind of just was who they were. This is a very interesting film to look at. There wasn't really a MacGuffin, unless you count the captured woman in the well. But outside of that, there's not a lot of huge character arcs or through points. Hannibal was who he was the entire film. Buffalo Bill was who he was the entire film. And Clarice Starling changed a little bit. I think she got some confidence, but I think she had that at the beginning. She just didn't know that she had it. It had to be kind of brought out of her. And we saw that. But, it was an interesting movie, 4.5 stars. I really, really loved this one. Like I said, I own the Criterion 4K. I'm holding it up. Jason can't see this. Got the poster, and I will be watching this again soon.
To all of you watching, thanks very much for taking part in our discussion of Jonathan Demme's The Silence of the Lambs. You can find us on Instagram and TikTok at Esoteric Cinema. And if you enjoyed this video, feel free to subscribe to our channel right here on YouTube. For myself, Jason Peters, my good friend Ryan Siebold, this has been Esoteric Cinema. Continue to appreciate film and enjoy the movies.